to the Eta Kappa Nu podcast, Career Conversations. My name is Rebecca Cohen, and I'm a member of the HKN Young Alumni Team, a group of young engineers and computer scientists navigating our own careers and sharing our conversations about work, life, family, and having it all. I'll be the host of today's Career Conversations episode on ethics in the engineering workplace. Today, we are joined by the 2020 IEEE USA President and the 2022 IEEE Eta Kappa Nu President, Dr. James Conrad. Dr. Conrad earned a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and a master's degree and PhD in computer engineering from North Carolina State University. Dr. Conrad has spent equal time working in industry at companies such as IBM and Ericsson and in academia, with professional experience including his work as a programmer, software engineer, research assistant, project manager, and professor. Dr. Conrad currently teaches and conducts research at UNC Charlotte in the areas of embedded systems, robotics, parallel processing, artificial intelligence, engineering education, and engineering ethics. Welcome, Jim.
Good day.
Thank you so much for joining us today to discuss the importance of being familiar with your organization's ethical codes and how to navigate situations that may land in a gray area or put an entry-level engineer in a rough spot. To start off, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to teach a course on ethics and why you feel it's such an important part of an engineering education?
Well, the course I teach in ethics is for professional engineers. Most professional engineers, to get licensure, need to actually participate in a engineering ethics course. And I was originally hired to do that. And I looked into a lot of the ethics codes that are developed by companies as well as organizations like IEEE or the professional engineering organizations.
Great. So, having seen kind of a wide variety of those ethical codes and knowing that there's some overlap between, IEEE members and professional engineers, does each one kind of stand on its own, or are they all kind of the same?
Typically, they all have the same types of categories of what is involved in correct ethics practice in the workplace. And a lot of them have things like, what is your primary role? Well, the primary role of an engineer is to serve society. A secondary role should be to serve your company, and the third would be to, of course, serve yourself. But most importantly, an engineer, and this is pretty much with all of them, whether it be IEEEs or Texas Instruments or National Society of Professional Engineers, they always say it's paramount to hold the safe health and welfare of the public as part of your job as an engineer or computer scientist, for that matter.
So it seems like, holding the benefit of the public as a major, ethical benefit seems more or less straightforward. But are there any tips you can share with things that might be a little bit less straightforward? Like, what is a real or perceived conflict of interest? I've seen that in a couple code of ethics.
Often when I run a course, we'll have examples and case studies of things. But one of the examples could be gifts. So in my industry, often it's not unusual to get a hat or a pen or maybe a T-shirt or something like that. And some people think that's not ethical, but in most cases, in almost all the company cases, they actually give you a guideline saying, nothing more than $20 value or something like that. Anything above that, and they do advise that you should return it back and say, no, that would be a violation. And really, you have to look at what the intent of that gift might be. If somebody is giving you a T-shirt or a pen, one of the goals of the company is to put their name in front of you so that you see it all the time. And it's a form of advertising. Usually something such a low value is not really perceived as a way to buy your influence. On the other hand, sending you on a trip to the Barbados to attend a conference where they will give you a sales pitch probably crosses that line as something that would be a little bit too extravagant, and they maybe are trying to buy your business. And that, of course, would be perceived as a conflict of interest or unethical.
Do you have any tips on kind of, finding that sweet spot of, it's still ethical? Like if someone is buying you drinks at dinner, or if someone is, maybe got you tickets to a game, but they're going, something that's not extravagant, but also maybe feels a little bit wrong. What's my next step?
And there are other situations that, as I said, they might fall in that gray area. A good example would be that trip to a local ballpark to watch your favorite baseball team, football team, et cetera, et cetera. And really, the guidelines are offered by a company that you work with. But in all cases, if you have a question about if it's ethical or not, your first line of defense is actually your immediate supervisor. They're the ones who should be aware if you think there might be something going on. They'll be able to answer it for you, or if they don't know, then they will check with somebody who does.
That's a good tip. And then, so let's say I see something going on around me that I'm not 100% sure is or isn't ethical. I don't know where they got this gift from, or, it seems like maybe someone is accepting something they shouldn't. What do I do next? Like, do I tell on someone if they're, 3 levels above me? That, where do I fit into this puzzle?
Ooh, now that's a very difficult question with respect to yeah, perception, right? So, keep in mind that one's perception of something may be such that they don't have the full story. And let's give a good example. In one of the courses that I give, I describe a situation where a company wants to have you attend a training session in Hawaii. Okay.
Mhm.
And perhaps that might be part of the package that they're trying to sell you. If you buy their software or something else like that, it comes with a training package, and it just so happens the shortest amount of time will be in Hawaii. If you wait another 6 months, it might be in Cleveland. You never know. And it may not be so much of a gift in that, the price of that training is actually built into the sales price. So it's not like they're going to give you something. And in fact, it may not be just you, it may be anybody. So if you don't know the full story, the best thing to do is to talk to your immediate supervisor and say that you recognize something. You don't have to use names, but you recognize something that might be a conflict.
So it sounds like talking to your manager is generally a good way forward, whether you're yourself in a gray area or you see something else that kind of rubs you the wrong way.
Correct. And that also assumes that you have a direct supervisor who is him or herself ethical in the first place, and that you have a good working relationship with.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. So I'm let's say I'm new to the field. I'm, a recent graduate, and I'm looking for, my first job out of college, or I'm looking for a new job and I'm early in my career. What are some things I should look for in, I guess, number one, a company, and number two, kind of in that interview process to tell me, this group is a good fit. I will, maybe align with their ethics more so than maybe another company.
And that's a good question, because there are many companies out there that some people would never want to work for. A good example might be a company that makes weapons for the military. If you have a ethical problem, or if you have a problem with working for a company that makes weapons, obviously you don't want to pursue that company. I mean, there's enough information out on the web that you can do a search and find out a whole bunch of information. One good place to look at is a lot of the financial websites will actually tell you governance problems with particular employers. You might find out if company X has had some ethics problems with respect to bribes, et cetera, in different countries or even in this country. So always do your homework before you interview with a company, just to make sure that their code of ethics and the way they practice ethics align with yours. And then, of course, during the interview itself, you need to perhaps ask questions with respect to what kind of work they expect you to do, and if that type of work is important for the public, and how they, if you want to even ensure how they will practice their ethics code in the workplace.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's say I'm someone who works for a large or multi-contract company. So I start off on one assignment and then I, complete that assignment and I'm moved on to a new project. If I don't agree with what's happening on the new project, or the new project isn't what I thought I signed up for in terms of ethically aligning with, what I want to be working on, what's my best course of action? Who do I talk to?
Then that is one of the more difficult ones. First of all, typically inside of a company, ethics is part of the culture of that company. And so no matter what branch you are in that company, usually the entire company is expected to practice that same level of ethics. If you're talking about you work for IBM, let's say, and at one time in my life, I worked for the space shuttle program. What could be more ethical than working on the space shuttle program, right? That's great. But it was in the Federal Systems Division, which also had contracts with military contractors and U.S. government agencies that might actually have been doing things that somebody might not perceive as fully ethical. Usually, I won't say always, but usually you're given the opportunity to accept or not accept a move within the organization. But you also have to think about, well, if you started working for this company, IBM, you had to investigate if they, what all the businesses that they were working in, and if that wanted to be a part of it. So you really have to let somebody know if you don't want to go into that particular specific work, and that will give you the opportunity to turn it down or not.
That makes sense. So it sounds like really it's on the interviewee to kind of learn, about the employer in advance and make sure that, it'll be a good fit going in and kind of continue to be a good fit long term.
Which gets harder and harder nowadays because many companies change drastically in the course of 5 years. Businesses that had never been in before now suddenly are in lots of businesses. So
yeah, there's no way to know kind of if you'll be bought out, if you'll kind of, merge any of that going forward.
Yes, that is true. There's a lot of small companies that are being bought up by big companies, and suddenly they're in the big behemoth that might be doing something that they don't like.
So just kind of shift again, let's talk a little bit about ethical practices as they kind of relate to the world today in general, with COVID and how that's kind of shaped industries going forward. So there's ethics in engineering practice, but then there's also ethics in the workplace of maybe mask mandates, or making sure that you're following kind of the protocol laid out by your state, things of that sort. If you're put in a situation where maybe you don't feel comfortable with the way that COVID has been handled, or you don't think that maybe the company fully understands or agrees with what your personal preferences are, even in terms of, vaccination or not. I've seen a lot of, both sides of it, where every government contractor is now required to be vaccinated. Is your first line manager still your first line of defense? What is an engineer to do?
You talk about one of the biggest hot buttons today, vaccination. There are many sides to the issue, and I'm not even going to say which side I'm on, but usually the first line of defense, as always, is your own manager. But also within companies, there are positions of ombudsman or a similar name type of position where you can go to be a whistleblower, ask questions, ask advice that is not your immediate supervisor. And so always know who that person or that organization is so that you might be able to ask that group specific questions. But again, this gets down to, you should know about the company going into it. But again, so many things have changed with COVID that a lot of these companies are just coming up and changing their policies because they had to. And that will happen with respect to many other things other than COVID. So the best course of action, of course, is to think about what the IEEE Code of Ethics, the National Society of Professional Engineers, or your own company, and try and abide by that as much as possible, keeping in mind that there may also be mandates, laws, etc., that really don't give you any choice. So in other words, I don't have a silver bullet, but there's, you have to abide by the best guidelines that are written down at the time for every situation.
That makes sense. And it's good to know that, working for a company, you can still kind of remain anonymous as you go through some of these kind of ethical hoops. If you don't necessarily either feel comfortable with your first line manager, or you just want to kind of start resolving the problem first before you bring it to your first line manager. So as kind of once again, as a young engineer kind of starting out, where would you start? Would you start with your company's code of ethics, IEEE's? If I want to start learning about kind of what I should be looking for and kind of how to measure up a company against a code of ethics to make sure that, this will be a match for me, what is the gold standard?
Well, the gold standard is what they publish externally to what they say with their code of ethics or code of conduct, or similar type of documentation. And again, as I mentioned before, take a look at their governance record to see what violations have been brought up against that company. There's a lot of companies out there that are very transparent and actually very impressive with respect to how they behave in the world marketplace. The other, of course, as I mentioned, once you get into the job, your first line of defense is your manager. But I should probably also add that any young professional should have a mentor. And a mentor is a very good resource for any engineer to bounce things against. And we're hoping, for example, in Eta Kappa Nu to establish a mentoring program such that older, more seasoned engineers will be able to be paired with younger engineers and have a dialogue on what's important and what to look out for, and maybe how to progress if they have problems.
That's a really great point. I think it's really important to have that kind of extra listening ear, but also someone with additional kind of maturity experience in the field that you can kind of bounce things off of and make sure you're not kind of taking giant leaps, making any assumptions, especially when it comes to kind of fine-grained things like staying within a code of ethics and navigating that.
That is true, yes.
Well, I think we are nearly at time. So is there any other kind of final thoughts you'd like to leave everyone with, or kind of a final tip on, navigating their own ethical code and maybe dilemmas?
One thing that I tell my students is, great, you get your degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, and you never stop in the learning process ever. So there is always going to be something you need to continue to learn about. New technologies, new ways of conducting business. Ethics should be one of those. So, continue to read those articles on the newest machine learning processes and algorithms, but also take the time to perhaps participate in an ethics course, short course, webinar, any opportunity that you get to learn more and more case studies. And you really will learn from examples. Case studies are a great way, and a lot of us actually teach with case studies and use those.
That's a great idea. Well, Jim, thank you so much for sharing your ethics expertise with us. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us for this episode of HKN Career Conversations. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast, visit our YouTube channel, and find us at hkn.org. Career Conversations is a series of podcasts that the Young Alumni Group of the HKN Honor Society bring together experts to have the career conversations about the challenges of being a professional today. This diverse group of hosts engage a range of guests and experiences in search of valuable guidance. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Jim, again for joining us and sharing your expertise.
It was a pleasure being here.